Rachel Torres had always been invisible in Millbrook, Texas, and that's exactly how she wanted it. The small town sat like a forgotten coin between rolling hills and endless sky, where everyone knew everyone's business except hers. For 6 years, she'd run Torres Auto Repair from a weathered building on the outskirts of town, fixing trucks and tractors with hands that moved like they remembered something nobody else could see. Every morning before dawn, locals heard the same sound, drifting from behind her shop, a deep, mechanical rumble that shook windows 3 blocks away. They called it Rachel's Thunder, joking that she must be rebuilding jet engines back there. If only they knew how close to the truth they were. Rachel was 42, but carried herself with the controlled grace of someone much younger. Her dark hair was always pulled back under a faded baseball cap, and her green eyes held a wariness that made people think twice before asking too many questions. She wore the same uniform every day: jeans, boots, and a navy tank top under an oil-stained jumpsuit she never fully zipped. A thin scar ran along her collarbone, barely visible, but always there like a signature she couldn't erase. The townspeople had theories, of course. Some whispered she'd fled an abusive marriage. Others suspected she was hiding from the law. Old Henry at the diner swore she'd been in the military, pointing to the way she stood at attention when the flag went up at the school. But Rachel answered only what needed answering, maintaining an invisible barrier that said, "This far and no further." What they didn't know was what sat hidden in the hangar behind her shop, concealed by overgrown oak trees and rusted chain-link fencing. Inside that structure, which didn't appear on any recent satellite images, was a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, battered, stripped of weapons, but meticulously maintained. Rachel had spent years bringing it back to life, sourcing parts through channels no civilian should know about, rebuilding systems from memory alone. The bird had no call sign, no official markings, but etched faintly inside the pilot's door was a single word: Valkyrie. Every Sunday evening, when the shop closed and the town settled into its weekend quiet, Rachel would sit in that cockpit, staring through the cracked windshield at the setting sun. Her hands would rest on the controls like they were greeting old friends, and for just a moment, the careful mask she wore would slip. In those moments, she wasn't Rachel Torres, the mechanic. She was someone else entirely. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Deputy Martinez stopped by for coffee, something he'd never done before in 6 years. He lingered by her workbench, studying the precision of her tool arrangements, the military-grade organization that she couldn't quite hide. "Funny thing happened yesterday," Martinez said, accepting the cup she offered. "Got a call from some federal boys asking about aircraft noise complaints in this area. Told them the only noise we get is from your shop, but they seemed real interested." In that, Rachel's hand didn't shake as she poured her own coffee, but something cold settled in her stomach. "People complain about everything these days." "That's what I told them." Martinez's eyes were sharp, studying her reaction. But they asked real specific questions. About flight patterns, unusual aircraft, maintenance facilities. He paused meaningfully. "About you." After he left, Rachel stood in her shop doorway, scanning the horizon with eyes trained to spot threats. Somewhere out there, people were asking questions about a woman who was supposed to not exist. The careful life she'd built was starting to crack, and she could feel the past reaching through the shadows to reclaim her. That night, she checked the Black Hawk systems with extra care, testing communications equipment she hadn't used in years. The aircraft responded like a faithful horse, every system green, every component ready. Whatever was coming, she wouldn't face it defenseless. But as she locked up the hangar and walked back to her small apartment above the shop, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that her invisible war was about to become very visible indeed. The quiet mechanic who fixed broken things was about to discover that some things, once broken, could never truly be repaired. And in the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, not just weather, but something that would shatter the peace she'd fought so hard to build. On this particular Monday, the storm clouds weren't just meteorological. Rachel was deep under the Black Hawk's chassis when she heard vehicles approaching. Not local trucks, these had military suspension, heavier engines, and moved with a precision that made her blood run cold. She slid out from under the aircraft, wiping grease from her hands as 3 black SUVs rolled up the gravel path. No license plates. No markings. 6 men stepped out in perfect synchronization, followed by a young officer in crisp fatigues who surveyed the area like he expected to find exactly what he was looking for. They didn't introduce themselves. The officer simply looked at the helicopter, then at her, and smiled with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. "You're Rachel Torres," he said. Not a question. She didn't answer, just met his gaze with the steady calm she'd perfected over years of practice. His smile widened. "We need to talk." Behind her, hidden under a canvas tarp, hung the flight suit she hadn't worn in a lifetime. Still pressed, still waiting. And for the first time in 6 years, Rachel felt the past reaching through the shadows to reclaim her. The officer stepped closer, his boots crunching on gravel. "We know who you really are, Valkyrie, and we need your help." The name hit like a physical blow, but Rachel's expression never changed. Some secrets she'd learned had a way of finding you no matter how deep you buried them. And this one had just walked onto her property wearing government badges and knowing smiles. "I think you have the wrong person," she said quietly. But deep in the hangar, the Black Hawk systems hummed with readiness, and Rachel Torres, the woman who had never existed on any official record, knew her carefully constructed life in Millbrook was about to end. The officer's name was Lieutenant Marcus Webb, and he carried himself like someone who'd never been told no. His team spread out around the hangar with practiced efficiency. Not threatening, but not casual either. They moved like professionals who knew exactly what they were looking for. "This is private property," Rachel said, stepping between Webb and the hangar door. "You don't have a warrant." Webb reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "Federal authorization under Section 10 to 214. We're investigating reports of unauthorized military assets in civilian hands." He glanced meaningfully at the tarp-covered shape behind her. "That's quite a restoration project you've got there." Rachel's jaw tightened. She'd covered every angle, or so she thought. The Black Hawk had been salvaged through legitimate channels, technically. The paperwork was buried so deep in military bureaucracy that it would take months to unravel. But Webb's presence meant someone had been watching, waiting. "I buy and sell scrap metal," she said. "Engine parts, mostly. Nothing that flies." One of Webb's men approached with a handheld scanner, sweeping it across the hangar's exterior wall. It pinged 3 times in quick succession. The man looked back at Webb and nodded. Webb's smile never wavered. "The thing about aircraft, Miss Torres, is they leave signatures. Heat patterns, electromagnetic fields, fuel residue. Even when they're supposedly inoperable." He took a step closer. "Your bird's been active recently. Very recently." Rachel felt the familiar weight of being hunted. The same feeling that had driven her to disappear 10 years ago. But this time was different. This time, she had something to protect, not just her identity, but the life she'd built in this quiet town. "You're fishing," she said. "Am I?" Webb pulled out a tablet, swiping to a series of aerial photographs. Satellite imagery from 3 weeks ago. Unidentified aircraft moving through restricted airspace over the Nevada desert. The flight pattern matched maneuvers only taught in classified programs. He looked up at her. Programs that officially never existed. The photo showed a dark, silhouette threading through canyon walls at impossible angles, flying without lights or transponder signals. Rachel recognized the terrain and the flying. It had been a test run, checking systems after a major overhaul. She'd thought she was invisible. Could be anyone, she said. Webb's expression hardened slightly. The pilot who flew that route. New tactics only taught to a very select group of aviators. Ghost Squadron pilots, to be specific. Problem is, Ghost Squadron was disbanded, all records sealed, and every pilot either killed in action or double quotes, he paused dramatically, disappeared. The silence stretched between them like a wire under tension. Rachel could feel his team analyzing her every micro-expression, looking for the crack that would confirm their suspicions. "There's no Ghost Squadron," she said finally. "Never was." "Officially, you're right." Webb put the tablet away. "But we both know the truth, don't we? Captain Rachel Valkyrie Hunter?" The name, her real name, landed like a punch to the gut. Rachel Hunter had died in a desert 10 years ago, erased from every database, every record, every official memory. Rachel Torres had been born in her place, quiet and unremarkable. But now the past had found her anyway. Webb stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We're not here to arrest you. We're here because there's a situation developing, and frankly, you're the only pilot alive with the skills to handle it." "I don't fly anymore," Rachel said. "A Navy SEAL team is pinned down in hostile territory. Their extraction pilot bailed when things got hot. The weather window is closing, and if we don't get them out in the next 12 hours, Webb let the implication hang in the air. Rachel turned away, staring at the storm clouds building on the horizon. "Send someone else. We tried. 3 pilots refused the mission. Too dangerous, they said. Narrow canyon, crosswinds, heavy ground fire." Webb's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "One of the men down there is Jackson Rivera. Ring any bells?" Rachel's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. Jackson had been her wingman, her shadow in the sky during the worst missions Ghost Squadron had ever flown. More than that, he was her godson, the boy she'd watched grow from a scrappy kid into one of the military's elite operators. Webb noticed her reaction. "He specifically requested you if anything ever went wrong. Said Valkyrie was the only pilot. Crazy enough to fly into hell and skilled enough to fly back out." Rachel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of old promises, old loyalties that she'd tried so hard to bury. Behind her, the Black Hawk sat silent but ready, systems checked, and fuel tanks topped off from her weekly maintenance routine. "How did you find me?" she asked. Webb smiled grimly. "Jackson never forgot about you. He's been tracking your movements for years, just in case. When we needed a miracle pilot, he gave us coordinates and a name. Rachel Torres, mechanic in Millbrook, Texas. Said to look for the woman who fixed engines by day and flew ghosts by night." The team began packing up their equipment, but Webb remained, watching her face in the fading light. "We'll be at the airfield in 1 hour," he said. "Your choice. But if you don't come, good people die. And Jackson Rivera becomes just another casualty of a war that officially doesn't exist." As the SUVs disappeared down the gravel road, Rachel stood alone in the gathering dusk. The storm was moving closer now, lightning flickering on the horizon. Light muzzle flashes. Inside the hangar, her flight suit hung waiting, and the Black Hawk's instruments glowed softly in the darkness. For 6 years, Rachel Torres had been invisible. But Valkyrie was about to wake up. Rachel stood in the hangar for 20 minutes after Webb's team left, staring at the flight suit hanging on its hook like a discarded skin. The radio on her workbench crackled with weather updates, storm system intensifying, winds gusting to 50 knots, visibility dropping fast. Suicide conditions for any normal pilot. But Rachel Hunter had never been normal. She walked to the locked cabinet. In the corner, her hands moving with muscle memory to the hidden panel behind the fire extinguisher. Inside was everything Webb's men hadn't found: classified flight manuals, encrypted communication devices, and a photo she hadn't looked at in years. The picture showed 6 pilots standing in front of a Black Hawk, faces blackened with desert, dust, and exhaustion. They looked like survivors of something that had never officially happened. In the center, barely 25 and wearing lieutenant bars, was Rachel herself. Next to her stood a teenage Jackson Rivera, fresh out of basic training and assigned to her squadron as a ground coordinator. She'd promised his mother she'd bring him home from every mission, and she had, until the day everything went wrong. The encrypted satellite phone buzzed once, a message on the emergency frequency only 3 people in the world knew. Rachel's fingers trembled slightly as she powered it up. The message was simple: Valkyrie, need extraction. Grid coordinates follow. Time critical. Jackson, he was alive. Injured, probably trapped, but alive. And he was reaching out to the one person he trusted to get him out of whatever hell he'd found himself in. Rachel grabbed the flight suit and began changing, each movement deliberate and practiced. The material felt strange after so many years, lighter than she remembered, but still perfectly fitted. As she zipped it up, she caught her reflection in the Black Hawk's polished surface. The woman looking back wasn't Rachel Torres anymore. She was Valkyrie. And Valkyrie didn't leave people behind. The helicopter's startup sequence was burned into her nervous system. Fuel pumps engaged, hydraulics pressurized, twin engines spinning. To life with a roar that shook the entire hangar. She'd rebuilt this bird to be better than military standard, quieter, faster, and equipped with modifications that technically didn't exist. As she lifted off into the storm, Rachel felt the familiar rush of flying something that shouldn't be able to fly. The Black Hawk cut through the wind like it was designed for exactly these conditions, systems responding to her touch with precision that bordered on telepathic. The coordinates Jackson had sent led to a canyon system in New Mexico, officially designated as uninhabited wasteland. Unofficially, it was a smuggling route used by cartels and other groups who preferred to operate outside government oversight. If Jackson's team was there, they weren't on a sanctioned mission. Rachel switched to the encrypted frequency. Ghost Leader, this is Valkyrie. Inbound to your position. Static. Then, Jesus Christ, is that really you? Jackson's voice, older and rougher than she remembered, but unmistakably him. Valkyrie, we are in deep trouble down here. Multiple hostiles, 1 man down, extraction site compromised. Copy that, Ghost Leader. What's your situation? 6-man team. Mission went sideways. We're pinned in a canyon with armed hostiles on 3 sides. Injured man needs immediate medical evacuation. Rachel checked her instruments. The storm was intensifying, and the canyon ahead was barely visible through sheets of rain. She'd flown worse conditions, but never in an aircraft she'd rebuilt from spare parts and determination. Ghost Leader, mark your position with infrared strobes. I'm coming in hot. Negative, Valkyrie. It's too dangerous. They've got RPGs, heavy weapons. This is a one-way trip. Rachel smiled grimly as she dropped the Black Hawk into the canyon, flying so low that the landing skids almost scraped the rocky walls. Jackson, you should know better by now. Valkyrie doesn't do one-way trips. The canyon opened up ahead of her, and she could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, a firefight in progress. On her thermal imaging, 6 figures were clustered behind a rock formation, while at least a dozen hostiles closed in from multiple directions. This was why they'd called her. This was the kind of extraction that required someone willing to fly into a kill box and thread the needle between death and impossible. Rachel armed the defensive system she'd installed flares, chaff, and a few modifications the military would never approve. Then she dove toward the firefight. the Black Hawk's rotors chopping the air like thunder. Ghost Leader, 30 seconds. Out. Pop smoke and get ready to move. Valkyrie, they've got us bracketed. You can't land here. Who said anything about landing? Rachel pulled the Black Hawk into a hover 20 feet off the ground. Rotor wash flattening everything in a 50-foot radius. Enemy fire immediately shifted to her aircraft. Rounds sparking off the armored hull she'd reinforced with materials that officially didn't exist. She keyed the intercom. Ghost team, move now. Through the chaos of spinning rotors and gunfire, she watched Jackson's team sprint toward the hovering helicopter. The injured man was carried between two others, while the remaining three provided covering fire. Jackson himself ran backward, laying down suppressive fire with calm precision. An RPG streaked past the cockpit, close enough that Rachel could feel the heat through the armored glass. She adjusted position slightly, keeping the aircraft stable while her passengers climbed aboard. All aboard. Jackson's voice crackled through the com. Rachel pulled collective, and the Black Hawk leaped skyward, climbing through the storm with a grace that defied physics. Behind them, muzzle flashes continued to strobe in the darkness, but they were already beyond effective range. Inside the cabin, Jackson slumped against the bulkhead, finally allowing exhaustion to show. He pulled off his night vision goggles and looked toward the cockpit where Rachel sat silhouetted against the instrument lights. 10 years, he said quietly. 10 years, and you still fly like the laws of physics are just suggestions. Rachel's voice came through the intercom, steady and professional. Some things you don't forget, Ghost Leader. Some promises you don't break. As they flew through the storm toward safety, Jackson realized that the quiet mechanic from Millbrook, Texas, had never really existed at all. She'd been a cover story, a mask worn by someone whose real identity was carved in classified missions and blood-soaked sand. Valkyrie was back, and that changed everything. The safe house was an abandoned airstrip 40 miles outside El Paso, the kind of place that appeared on no official maps and asked no questions. Rachel set the Black Hawk down on cracked concrete as dawn broke over the desert, her hands steady despite flying through hell for the past 6 hours. Jackson's team was professional enough not to ask questions during the flight, but she could feel them studying her, trying to reconcile the mythical pilot they'd heard whispered about with the woman in the cockpit. As they unloaded their injured teammate, Jackson approached her with something she recognized as both gratitude and concern. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Rachel nodded, following him away from the others to where a weathered Quonset hut sat at the edge of the tarmac. Inside, maps covered every wall, and communications equipment hummed with encrypted chatter. This wasn't just a safe house, it was a command center for operations that didn't officially exist. "Nice setup," Rachel observed, running her fingers along a bank of monitors displaying real-time satellite feeds. "Things have gotten complicated since you disappeared," Jackson said, settling into a chair that suggested he spent a lot of time here. "Ghost Squadron is officially disbanded, but some of us never really left. We handle situations that are too sensitive for regular military channels." Rachel studied his face in the dim light. Jackson was 32 now, no longer the eager kid she'd once mentored, but a seasoned operator with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. "What kind of situations?" "The kind where politicians need deniability and soldiers need to disappear." He gestured toward the maps. "Drug cartels working with foreign intelligence services. Arms dealers selling military hardware to terrorists. The mission you just extracted us from, we were tracking a weapon shipment that included Stinger missiles stolen from a base in Afghanistan." Rachel felt a familiar chill. "Who's running the show?" Jackson's expression darkened. "That's the problem," We thought we were working for a classified CIA division. Clean funding, legitimate targets, proper oversight. But something's wrong. Our handler's been pushing us toward increasingly dangerous missions, and our intel has been compromised. 3 times in the past month. He pulled out a tablet, scrolling through encrypted files. The mission you just saved us from was supposed to be simple surveillance. Instead, we walked into a trap with 20 armed hostiles who knew exactly when and where we'd arrive. Rachel studied the tactical reports, her mind automatically analyzing the patterns. She'd seen this before: operations designed to fail, assets being expendedized, cover stories that didn't quite add up. "You think someone's using you?" she asked. "I think someone's trying to clean house," Jackson replied. "Remove witnesses to operations that were never supposed to happen, starting with Ghost Squadron alumni who know too much." The implication hit her like a cold wind. If Jackson was right, then her appearance on government radar wasn't coincidence, it was targeting. Webb's recruitment pitch hadn't been about needing her skills. It had been about getting her out in the open where she could be eliminated. "How many of the original squadron are still alive?" she asked. Jackson consulted his tablet. "Officially? None. Ghost Squadron never existed, remember? But unofficially, there were 8 pilots when we disbanded. 3 died in operations that went bad. 2 more died in accidents over the past year. You disappeared completely. That leaves me, you, and..." He paused, scrolling through classified files. Marcus Webb. Rachel's blood went cold. Webb was Ghost Squadron? Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Calcine Reaper. He was our youngest pilot. Ambitious as hell and absolutely ruthless in combat. After disbandment, he transferred to Pentagon Intelligence. Rapid promotion, high-level clearance, access to classified personnel files. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Webb hadn't been recruiting her. He'd been hunting her. The extraction mission had been bait, designed to get her airborne and vulnerable. If she'd followed his instructions and reported to the official airfield, she would have walked into a trap. "He's been tracking us," Rachel said. "All of us." Jackson nodded grimly. "I think Webb made a deal. Information about Ghost Squadron operations in exchange for career advancement. But deals like that don't end clean. Eventually, everyone who knows the truth becomes a liability." Rachel moved to the window, watching her Black Hawk sitting motionless on the tarmac. She'd thought she was saving Jackson, but instead she'd exposed herself to someone who wanted her dead. "There's more," Jackson continued. "I found this in our handler's files." He handed her a classified document marked with clearance levels she'd never seen before. Operation Clean Slate. Systematic elimination of personnel with knowledge of unauthorized covert operations. The document listed targets by Calcine, Ghost 1 through Ghost 8. 7 names had been crossed out in red. Only 2 remained active. Ghost 6, Jackson, and Ghost 2, Valkyrie. "They're not just hunting us," Rachel realized. "They're erasing evidence that Ghost Squadron ever existed." Jackson stood up, moving to a wall safe hidden behind a map of Central America. Inside were hard drives, encrypted files, and photographs that could bring down administrations. "I've been collecting evidence for 2 years," he said. "Every operation, every target, every order that came down through unofficial channels. If something happens to us, this gets released to journalists who specialize in government conspiracies." Rachel looked at the intelligence cache, then back at Jackson. "What do you need from me?" "I need Valkyrie to disappear again," he said. "Go back to being Rachel Torres, fix engines, stay invisible. Let them think they won. And you?" Jackson's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want. A Ghost Squadron pilot right out in the open, making himself an irresistible target." Rachel understood immediately. You're going to use yourself as bait. While they're focused on me, you document everything. Get the evidence to people who can use it. Clean slate ends, or we all end. As the sun climbed higher over the desert, Rachel felt the weight of old loyalties and new dangers pressing down on her. She'd spent 10 years running from her past. But the past had finally cornered her. The war for Ghost Squadron's survival was about to begin. And this time, there would be no extraction. Rachel returned to Millbrook 3 days later. But the town felt different now, like a stage set where everyone was playing a role they didn't understand. She went through the motions of normal life, opening the shop, working on local vehicles, maintaining the careful fiction of Rachel Torres. But her senses were hyper-tuned to every detail. The way Sheriff Clay lingered too long when he stopped by for coffee, the unmarked sedan that appeared at the diner twice in one day, the helicopter that passed overhead just outside visual range. They were watching. Webb's people had found her sanctuary and were probing for weaknesses. On Thursday morning, the trap began to close. Rachel? The voice belonged to Amanda Foster, Millbrook's postmaster and unofficial town gossip. She stood at the shop's entrance, holding an overnight envelope with hands that trembled slightly. This came for you. Federal Express. Marked urgent. Rachel wiped her hands on a shop rag before accepting the package. The return address was generic a law office in Dallas she'd never heard of. But the weight and size told her everything she needed to know. Classified documents, the kind that carried prison sentences just for possession. Thank you, Amanda. Rachel's voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Amanda hesitated at the door. Rachel, there's been some talk around town. Folks are wondering about those government people who came by last week. Sheriff Clay says they were asking questions about you, about your background. People talk, Rachel replied, turning back to the engine she'd been working on. Usually about things they don't understand. After Amanda left, Rachel sealed the shop and retreated to the hangar. The envelope contained exactly what she'd expected. Classified files from Ghost Squadron operations, stamped with security clearances that made their possession by civilians a federal crime. Someone was setting her up, creating evidence that would justify a raid, arrest, and permanent silence. Her encrypted phone buzzed once. Jackson's signal. She drove to their prearranged meeting point and abandoned gas, stationed 15 miles outside, and found him waiting in civilian clothes, looking like any other traveler taking a break from highway driving. They move faster than I expected, he said without preamble. Webb's got authorization for a joint task force raid. FBI, DA, ATF, enough badges to make it look legitimate. They're coming for you tomorrow morning. Rachel felt the familiar calm that preceded combat. Evidence? Jackson handed her a tablet showing intercepted communications. Search warrant based on anonymous tips about stolen military equipment and classified document possession. Bail. Find whatever they planted, arrest you for national security violations, and you'll disappear into a black site prison. She scrolled through the operational plans, noting the deployment times, team compositions, and rules of engagement. Overwhelming force designed to prevent resistance. How long do I have? 18 hours, maybe less. They're staging at the county airfield tonight. Rachel studied the tactical breakdown. 12 agents, full combat gear, helicopter support, against a single woman living alone in a metal building. It would be over in minutes if she played by their rules. There's something else, Jackson continued. I tracked Webb's communications. This isn't just about eliminating witnesses. There's a buyer for Ghost Squadron Intel Foreign Intelligence. Service willing to pay millions for operational details on U.S. covert capabilities. The scope of the betrayal became clear. Webb wasn't just cleaning house. He was monetizing everything Ghost Squadron had done, selling their secrets to the highest bidder while eliminating the people who could expose him. Names? Rachel asked. Still working on it? But the transaction happens in 48 hours. If we're gonna stop this, it has to be now. Rachel looked toward the horizon where storm clouds were gathering again. Another Texas thunderstorm rolling in from the west. Weather had always been her ally, the chaotic element that separated true pilots from mere aircraft operators. I need you to do exactly what I tell you, she said. No questions, no deviations. Can you do that? Jackson nodded. What's the plan? Rachel smiled, and for a moment Jackson saw the young pilot who'd once threaded a helicopter through enemy fire. To save his life, we're going to give Webb exactly what he wants. A Ghost Squadron pilot, out in the open, making herself an irresistible target. That evening, Rachel made her preparations with methodical precision. She packed the Black Hawk with everything that mattered: backup fuel cells, encrypted communication equipment, and the evidence cache Jackson had compiled. The helicopter itself she prepared like a weapon systems optimized, defensive measures armed, flight computers programmed with escape routes that would take her beyond radar coverage. Most importantly, she set up the decoy. The hangar's security system included motion sensors and remote cameras she'd installed to watch for intruders. But tonight, she reconfigured them to broadcast on frequencies the government task force would be monitoring. Let them see exactly what they expected: a panicked fugitive preparing to flee in the night. At midnight, she powered up the Black Hawk's engines, letting them run loud enough to wake half the town. Then she shut them down and slipped out through the hangar's rear exit, leaving the building empty except for shadows and electronic signatures that would fool surveillance until it was too late. By dawn, Rachel was 20 miles away, hidden in a canyon that didn't appear on any maps, watching through binoculars as the government convoy surrounded her empty shop. She keyed her radio to the frequency she knew Webb would be monitoring. This is Valkyrie to all units. You're a day late and several $1 billion short. The response was immediate. Valkyrie, this is Task Force Commander Webb. You're surrounded and have no escape routes. Surrender now, and you'll be treated fairly. Rachel's laughter echoed across the radio waves. Marcus, you always were better at lying than flying, but you made one mistake. What's that? You assumed I was running from you. Rachel started the Black Hawk's engines, the sound thundering through the canyon like a declaration of war. I'm not running, Marcus. I'm hunting. As she lifted off into the storm, Rachel felt the familiar rush of combat. For 10 years, she'd been hiding from her past. Now it was time to confront it head-on. The final battle for Ghost Squadron's legacy was about to begin. Webb's task force had expected to find a frightened mechanic hiding in a converted hangar. Instead, they found an empty building rigged with enough surveillance equipment to track their every movement. The realization that they'd been outmaneuvered hit Webb like a physical blow as he stood in Rachel's abandoned shop, staring at monitors that showed his own tactical positions in real time. Sir, one of his agents called from the hangar entrance. You need to see this. Inside the hangar, where the Black Hawk should have been, was a message spray-painted in military stencil letters across the concrete floor. Ghost Squadron sends their regards. Volt, Webb keyed his radio with barely controlled fury. All units, target is airborne and mobile. Switch to active pursuit protocols. But Rachel was already 3 steps ahead. From her canyon hideout, she watched the government helicopters lift, off in formation, following flight patterns she'd anticipated and prepared for. Their pilots were good federal aviation specialists with thousands of hours of experience. But they'd never flown against someone who helped write the tactical manual they were using. Rachel's Black Hawk emerged from the canyon like a shadow, given substance, flying so low that her landing skids kicked up dust from the desert floor. She switched to the encrypted frequency Jackson was monitoring. Package delivered, she transmitted. Phase 2 is active. Jackson's voice crackled. Back. Confirmed. Target acquired and moving to intercept. While Webb's team chased Rachel through the Texas sky, Jackson was infiltrating Webb's temporary command center at the county airfield. He moved with the silent precision of someone trained in military infiltration, slipping past perimeter security. To plant surveillance devices that would record everything Webb's team said and did. The real battle wasn't happening in the air, it was happening in the digital realm, where classified files and recorded conversations would provide the evidence needed to expose. Operation Clean Slate. Rachel led Webb's helicopters on a chase. Through canyons and storm clouds, always staying just within sensor range, making herself irresistible bait while Jackson documented their illegal pursuit of a civilian. Every radio transmission, every tactical decision, every violation of federal aviation regulations was being recorded and transmitted to secure servers. Jackson had established. Valkyrie, this is Reaper 6. Webb's voice cut through the radio. Static. He'd taken personal command of the pursuit, flying the lead helicopter himself. You can't run forever. We know your fuel capacity, your range limitations. This ends one way. Rachel smiled as she pulled the Black Hawk into a climb that should have been impossible for an aircraft her size. Marcus, you always underestimated your equipment. Let me show you what proper maintenance can accomplish. She dove into a canyon so narrow that Webb's larger helicopters couldn't follow, threading between rock walls with inches to spare. Her pursuers were forced to go around, losing precious time and revealing their tactical limitations. But Rachel wasn't just showing off. Every maneuver was calculated to keep Webb's team focused on her while Jackson completed his real mission, accessing Webb's classified communications and downloading evidence that would prove his betrayal of Ghost Squadron. Got it. Jackson's voice came through her earpiece. File transfer complete. Webb's been selling operational intelligence to a consortium of foreign buyers. Names, dates, transaction records, everything we need. Rachel checked her instruments. She'd been airborne for 2 hours, and Webb's helicopters were starting to coordinate more effectively. Time to end this game on her terms. She keyed the open frequency, broadcasting on channels monitored by Federal Aviation Control, news organizations, and military command structures. This is Captain Rachel Hunter, CalSign Valkyrie, formerly of Classified Military Aviation Unit, Ghost Squadron. I am currently being pursued by a task force led by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, who has been selling classified military intelligence to foreign entities. The radio exploded with chatter as multiple agencies attempted to establish communication. Rachel continued her broadcast, reading from the evidence Jackson had compiled. Webb has systematically eliminated Ghost Squadron personnel to cover his espionage activities. Operation Clean Slate, authorized under his command, has resulted in the deaths of at least 5 former pilots and support personnel. Webb's voice cut through the chaos. Valkyrie, terminate this transmission immediately. You're broadcasting classified information on open channels. The classification was designed to hide your crimes, Marcus. Consider it declassified. Rachel transmitted data packets containing Webb's communications, financial records, and operational plans to news organizations and government oversight committees simultaneously. Within minutes, the story would be in the hands of journalists who specialized in exposing government corruption. All units weapons-free, Webb commanded. Target is a hostile combatant engaged in espionage activities. But his helicopters were federal law enforcement aircraft, not military gunships. Their weapons were designed for crowd control and suspect apprehension, not air-to-air combat. Rachel's Black Hawk, on the other hand, had been modified with defensive systems that officially didn't exist. When Webb's lead helicopter fired warning shots, Rachel released chaff and flares that turned the sky into a light show visible for miles. She pulled into a climb that brought her above the cloud layer, then dove back down behind Webb's formation. "Marcus," she transmitted calmly, "you're outgunned, outflown, and out of time. Your superiors are probably receiving my evidence package right now. How long before they start asking questions about your bank accounts and foreign contacts?" Webb's response was a coordinated attack by all 3 government helicopters, but Rachel was no longer where their targeting systems indicated. She'd vanished into the storm clouds, using weather as camouflage in a way that left Webb's pilots disoriented and frustrated. From above the cloud layer, Rachel watched their search patterns through her enhanced sensors. They were flying predictably now, desperation making them sloppy. She keyed her radio one final time. "Marcus, check your secure communications. I think you'll find some interesting messages waiting." Webb's helicopter suddenly broke formation, climbing rapidly toward clearer radio reception. Rachel knew what he was seeing: messages from Pentagon Oversight, FBI, Internal Affairs, and Congressional Intelligence Committees, all demanding immediate explanations for his unauthorized operation. The trap had been sprung perfectly. Webb's illegal pursuit of a civilian had been documented and broadcast. His financial crimes were being investigated by federal agencies, and his network of foreign buyers was being rolled up by counterintelligence specialists who'd been tracking the money trail Jackson had uncovered. "This isn't over," Webb transmitted, his voice tight with rage. "Yes, it is," Rachel replied. Ghost Squadron is officially avenged. As Webb's helicopters were recalled to face investigation, Rachel disappeared into the vast Texas sky, leaving behind only the echo of rotor blades and the satisfaction of justice finally served. The Pentagon briefing room was sterile and windowless, designed to contain secrets and careers that ended badly. Marcus Webb sat at a metal table, his uniform stripped of insignia, facing a panel of investigators whose expressions ranged from disappointment to barely contained fury. General Patricia Morrison, head of military intelligence oversight, spoke with the crisp authority of someone who'd spent 30 years cleaning up messes like Webb. "Colonel Webb, we have evidence of systematic espionage, murder of military personnel, and the unauthorized sale of classified operational intelligence to foreign entities. How do you respond?" Webb's lawyer, a nervous man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. "My client exercises his right to remain silent pending." "Your client," Morrison interrupted, "compromised national security for personal gain and murdered American service members to cover his tracks. The evidence is overwhelming." On the wall behind the panel, monitors displayed the documentation Jackson had compiled: financial records showing payments from foreign intelligence services, communications proving Webb's role in targeting Ghost Squadron alumni, and tactical plans for Operation Clean Slate that revealed its true purpose. Webb finally spoke, his voice hollow. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. Ghost Squadron knew too much, had access to operations that could embarrass multiple administrations. Someone had to make the hard choices." "The hard choice," Morrison replied coldly, "would have been following your oath instead of selling it to the highest bidder." 200 miles away, in a secure facility outside Washington, Jackson Rivera watched the proceedings through encrypted video feed. He sat in a debriefing room with his own panel of investigators, but these were friendly faces, CIA internal security specialists who'd been hunting Webb's network for months. "Your evidence provided the final pieces we needed," Agent Sandra Phillips told him. Webb's buyers included representatives from 3 hostile intelligence services. "The damage assessment will take months, but your actions prevented the sale of active operational details." Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of 2 years of careful investigation finally paying off. "What about the other Ghost Squadron personnel? The ones who died?" Phillips consulted her files. We've reopened all cases involving former squadron members. Preliminary findings suggest at least 7 deaths were actually assassinations designed to eliminate witnesses to classified operations. And Rachel? Valkyrie? Philip smiled slightly. Officially, no such person exists. Rachel Torres returned to Millbrook, Texas, where she continues to operate an automotive repair shop. As far as federal records show, she's never been anything but a civilian mechanic. Jackson understood. Rachel had vanished back into her carefully constructed identity, protected by the same classification systems that had once hunted her. The woman who'd saved his life and exposed Webb's conspiracy had earned her anonymity. Meanwhile, in a congressional hearing room televised on C-SPAN, the fallout from Operation Clean Slate continued to reverberate through Washington's power structures. Representative James Crawford, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, addressed cameras with the practiced gravity of someone who understood that careers lived and died in moments like these. The systematic elimination of American military personnel by their own government represents a betrayal of the highest order. This committee will investigate every aspect of these operations and hold accountable all individuals involved. Behind him, enlarged photographs showed the faces of Ghost Squadron's 8 original pilots. 7 had been murdered or died under suspicious circumstances. Only one remained officially alive, Jackson Rivera, now testifying under congressional protection about operations that had been buried under layers of classification and deliberate obscurity. The media frenzy lasted for weeks. Investigative journalists who'd received Rachel's evidence packets published exposes detailing the scope of Webb's betrayal, the foreign intelligence connections, and the systematic murder of American service members. Public outrage forced congressional hearings, Pentagon investigations, and a complete overhaul of oversight procedures for classified military operations. Webb himself disappeared into the federal prison system, his location classified. For his own protection, the foreign buyers he'd been working with found their operations compromised and their assets frozen. The network that had murdered 7 pilots was dismantled piece by piece. But the real victory came in the form of a small ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, where 7 previously unmarked graves received proper headstones identifying them as Ghost Squadron pilots killed in the line of duty. Their families, who'd been told their loved ones died in training accidents, finally learned the truth about their sacrifices. Jackson stood at attention during the ceremony, wearing his dress uniform and carrying a folded flag that would be presented to the families. Behind him, honor guards fired a 21-gun salute that echoed across the rolling hills of America's most sacred ground. As the ceremony concluded, Jackson noticed a woman standing at the edge of the crowd, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. She wore civilian clothes and dark sunglasses, but her posture was unmistakably military. For just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Rachel Torres, or whoever she truly was, nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of mourners and visitors. She'd come to pay respects to fallen comrades, but she wouldn't risk exposure by approaching closer. Jackson understood. Some ghosts needed to remain ghosts. 6 months after Webb's conviction, Millbrook, Texas, looked exactly the same as it always had. Dust still hung in the air like memories. The sky was still too big, and the town still felt like time moved differently here. But for Rachel Torres, everything had changed in ways that nobody else could see. She stood in her shop on a quiet Tuesday morning, hands deep in the engine compartment of Sheriff Clay's patrol car, listening to the familiar sounds of a small town waking up. The coffee shop's bell chimed as early customers arrived for their caffeine fix. A delivery truck rumbled down Main Street. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at something that probably wasn't there. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The bell above her shop door chimed, and Rachel looked up to see a young woman in military fatigue standing in the entrance. Clean-cut, nervous, with the particular blend of confidence and uncertainty that marked recent academy graduates. "Are you Rachel Torres?" the woman asked. Rachel wiped her hands on a rag, studying the visitor. No insignia she could identify, but the bearing was unmistakably military. "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, Army Aviation. I was told you might be able to help with the problem I'm having." Rachel's expression didn't change, but her senses sharpened. What kind of problem? Jennifer glanced around the shop, noting the precision with which tools were arranged, the way every piece of equipment showed signs of meticulous maintenance. The kind that involves aircraft that officially don't exist and pilots who need to disappear. For a long moment, the two women studied each other. Rachel saw herself from 10 years ago, young, idealistic, caught in a system that chewed up good people and spit out secrets. Jennifer saw something she'd only heard whispered about in classified briefings. A legend who'd walked away from the machine and somehow survived. "I don't know what you're talking about," Rachel said finally. Jennifer reached into her jacket and pulled out a photograph aerial surveillance showing a Black Hawk helicopter threading through canyon walls at impossible angles. This was taken 2 weeks ago over the Nevada desert. The pilot was testing modifications to stealth technology that doesn't appear in any official research program. Rachel glanced at the photo, then back to Jennifer's face. "Could be anyone." "Could be," Jennifer agreed. But the flight pattern matched maneuvers from a training program that was classified above my clearance level. When I asked my commanding officer about it, he told me some questions were better left unasked. Rachel set down her tools and walked to the coffee maker in the corner, pouring 2 cups with practiced efficiency. She handed one to Jennifer and gestured toward a pair of folding chairs near the window. "What's your real problem, Lieutenant?" Jennifer accepted the coffee gratefully. "There's a program. Officially, it doesn't exist, but they're recruiting pilots for operations that fall outside normal military channels. The briefings are compartmentalized, the missions are classified. Beyond anything I've seen, and the pilots who accept these assignments, they change. Change how? They become isolated, paranoid. Some of them stop talking to their families, stop maintaining relationships outside the program. A few have had accidents during training exercises." Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think they're rebuilding Ghost Squadron." Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air conditioning. "And they want you. They say I have the right psychological profile. Exceptional pilot skills, limited family, connections, willingness to follow orders without questioning the bigger picture." Jennifer looked directly at Rachel. "They say I remind them of someone called Valkyrie." The coffee cup trembled slightly in Rachel's hand before she set it down. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know what happened to the original Ghost Squadron. I want to understand what I'm really being recruited for, but I want to know if there's another option." Rachel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street where nothing ever seemed to change. But change was coming anyway, in the form of young pilots being drawn into the same web that had once trapped her. "The original Ghost Squadron," she said quietly, "was created to handle missions too sensitive for regular military channels. We flew places that didn't exist, extracted people who were never supposed to be there, and eliminated threats that couldn't be acknowledged. Officially." She turned back to Jennifer. "For a while, we thought we were serving our country. The programs like that... They create their own momentum. Soon you're not just protecting national security, you're protecting the program itself. And when the program becomes more important than the people in it, people start dying," Jennifer finished. Rachel nodded. "The question you have to ask yourself is whether you're willing to become someone else entirely. Because that's what the program requires. You stop being Jennifer Walsh and become a call sign, a tool, a resource to be expended when necessary. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Is there another way? Rachel smiled for the first time since the conversation began. There's always another way, but it requires courage to walk away from everything you think you want. She moved to her desk and pulled out a business card plain white cardstock with only a phone number printed in simple black text. If you decide you want a different kind of life, call this number. Tell them Rachel sent you. They'll help you disappear from the program's radar. Jennifer took the card, studying the number. What about you? Are you really just a mechanic? Now? Rachel looked toward the hangar behind the shop, where a Black Hawk helicopter sat in perfect readiness, maintained with the kind of care that suggested it might be needed at any moment. I fix things that are broken, she said. Sometimes that means engines. Sometimes it means people. And sometimes it means systems that have lost their way. As Jennifer prepared to leave, she turned back one final time. The program handlers told me Valkyrie was dead. Rachel's smile was enigmatic. Maybe she is, but legends have a way of inspiring the living. After Jennifer left, Rachel returned to Sheriff Clay's engine, working with steady hands while her mind processed the implications of what she'd learned. The ghost of her past was rising again, taking new forms and hunting new victims. But this time, she wouldn't be running. In the hangar behind the shop, the Black Hawk systems hummed quietly in standby mode, ready for whatever mission might come next. Because some legends never really die. They just wait in the shadows for the moment, when they're needed most. And in the growing twilight of a Texas evening, Valkyrie was very much alive, watching over those who couldn't protect themselves and ready to fly into hell one more time if that's what justice required. The phone on her desk rang once a secure line that very few people knew existed. Rachel answered on the second ring. This is Torres Auto Repair. Torres, Ken Jackson's familiar voice. We've got a situation. Young pilot named Jennifer Walsh just walked away from a classified recruitment program. They're going to come looking for her. Rachel smiled, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Let them come. Ghost Squadron protects its own. Copy that, Valkyrie. Welcome back to the fight. As night fell over Millbrook, the quiet mechanic who fixed broken things prepared for another mission that officially would never happen. Because some promises were too important to break, and some fights were too necessary to avoid. The legend of Valkyrie lived on not in classified files or military records, but in the courage of those who refused to let good people disappear into the machinery of institutional darkness. And in a small Texas town where time moved differently, a woman who had chosen her own identity continued to write her story on her own terms, one rescued soul at a time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.